In a small, quiet town nestled in the heart of the Midwest, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with modest homes, each one telling its own story through chipped paint or overgrown gardens. Among these houses stood an unassuming white cottage belonging to John Anderson, an elderly man whose presence commanded respect despite his gentle demeanor. John was no ordinary resident. He was a decorated war veteran who had served his country during the Vietnam War. Though decades had passed since he traded his uniform for civilian clothes, memories of his service lingered, not just in faded photographs on his walls, but also in the way he carried himself, proud, dignified, and resilient. Now in his late 70s, John lived alone after losing his wife to illness years ago. His days revolved around simple pleasures, tending to his garden, sipping coffee on the porch, and occasionally chatting with neighbors about the weather or local happenings. Despite his age, John remained active, finding joy in maintaining his home and yard. His pride and joy was the wooden fence that surrounded his property, a relic from when he first moved into the house with his wife. Over time, the fence had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, but it still stood strong, much like John himself. Recently, he decided it needed a fresh coat of paint, not because it was falling apart, but because it gave him something meaningful to do. On a bright, sunny afternoon, John rolled up his sleeves and set to work. Armed with a bucket of white paint, a brush, and a ladder, he began carefully applying strokes to the weathered wood. The rhythmic motion of painting soothed him, transporting him back to simpler times. As he worked, sweat trickled down his forehead, but he didn't mind. He hummed old tunes under his breath, occasionally pausing to admire his progress. Neighbors passing by waved or called out greetings, which John returned warmly. To them, he was more than just the quiet old man next door. He was a symbol of perseverance, someone who had lived through hardships yet always seemed content with what life offered. Unbeknownst to John, this peaceful moment would soon be shattered. Down the street, Officer Grayson sat in his patrol car, drumming his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. Known throughout the neighborhood as a volatile figure, Grayson had earned a reputation for being abrasive and prejudiced. While some officers prided themselves on building trust within the community, Grayson thrived on intimidation. He often targeted minorities, using his badge as a shield to justify his biases. Complaints against him piled up at the station, but nothing ever came of them. Many residents avoided crossing paths with him, fearing his temper and unchecked authority. Grayson drove past John's house. His eyes landed on the elderly man bent over his fence. Something about the sight irritated him. An African-American man calmly going about his business, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. In Grayson's twisted worldview, people like John didn't deserve such tranquility. Pulling over, abruptly, Grayson stepped out of his car, slamming the door behind him. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached John, his expression darkening with every step. "Hey, old man," he barked, startling John mid-stroke. "What are you doing? Trying to make this place look fancy?" John turned slowly. Confusion etched across his face. "Just fixing up my fence," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. He recognized Grayson immediately and knew better than to engage in an argument. But Grayson wasn't satisfied with a polite answer. Leaning closer, he sneered. "You think anyone cares about your little project here? Maybe you should stick to things you're actually good at." His words dripped with mockery, each syllable designed to cut deeper. John clenched his jaw, refusing to give Grayson the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. Instead, he resumed painting, hoping the officer would grow bored and leave. But Grayson wasn't done. Emboldened by John's silence, he launched into a tirade, hurling insults laced with racial slurs. Each word felt like a punch to the gut, leaving John reeling. Still, he held his ground, focusing on the task at hand. That's when Grayson crossed, a line he couldn't uncross. Reaching into his car, he grabbed a can of red spray paint. With a malicious grin, he shook it vigorously before aiming it directly at John. Before the veteran could react, Grayson pressed the nozzle, releasing a stream of bright red paint onto John's head. The cold liquid splattered across his hair and face, dripping down his neck and staining his shirt. The shock hit John like a freight train. He staggered backward, dropping his paintbrush as his hands instinctively flew to his face. Tears welled up in his eyes, not just from the humiliation of the act, but from the sheer cruelty of it all. How could someone treat another human being this way? Neighbors peered out of their windows, horrified by the scene unfolding before them. Some wanted to intervene, but fear of Grayson's wrath kept them rooted in place. For a few agonizing moments, the only sounds were Grayson's cruel laughter and John's labored breathing as he tried to process what had just happened. Little did either of them know, fate was about to intervene in a way neither could have anticipated. Unknown to Grayson, John's son, Michael Anderson, was driving home earlier than usual that day. A high-ranking colonel stationed at a nearby military base, Michael made it a point to visit his father regularly. Dressed in his full military uniform, complete with medals gleaming under the sun, he rounded the corner just in time to witness the horrifying spectacle. His stomach churned as he saw Grayson laughing while holding the spray paint can, and his father standing there, visibly shaken and covered in paint. Michael slammed on the brakes, his mind racing with disbelief and anger. Stepping out of his car, he exuded an aura of authority that silenced Grayson mid-laugh. Every movement deliberate, Michael strode toward the scene, his polished boots clicking against the pavement. "Officer," he said, his voice calm yet laced with steel. "Do you know who I am?" Grayson froze, his smirk faltering as he took in the sight of the imposing figure before him. The insignia on Michael's uniform left no room for doubt. This was not someone to trifle with. Colonel Michael Anderson faced Grayson squarely, his piercing gaze locking onto the officer's now pale face. "I am Colonel Michael Anderson of, the United States Army," he declared, his voice cutting through the tense air like a blade. "And that man you just attacked is my father, a decorated veteran who served this country honorably. Would you care to explain why you thought it was acceptable to treat him this way?" Grayson stammered, fumbling for words as the gravity of the situation dawned on him. For once the tables had turned, the bully found himself cornered by someone far more powerful. This confrontation marked the beginning of a chain reaction that would ripple through the town and beyond. News of the incident spread quickly, igniting outrage and sparking conversations about racism, accountability, and justice. What started as a quiet afternoon in a sleepy Midwestern town became a catalyst for change, proving that even in the darkest moments, courage and resilience could pave the way for hope. The moment Michael Anderson stepped out of his car, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter that had filled the air just seconds ago evaporated, replaced by an eerie silence. Grayson, who had been reveling in his cruelty, suddenly found himself frozen in place. His spray paint can hung limply at his side as he stared at the imposing figure now standing before him. Michael's military uniform was immaculate, every medal, every stripe polished to perfection under the afternoon sun. It wasn't just the uniform that commanded attention, it was the look in his eyes. They burned with a mix of fury and resolve, leaving no doubt that this man meant business. "Officer," Michael repeated, his voice steady but laced with authority. "Do you know who I am?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Grayson to respond. For a brief moment, Grayson seemed confused, his mind struggling to process the sudden turn of events. But when he finally glanced at the insignia on Michael's shoulder, a clear indication of his rank, he visibly paled. The smirk that had plastered his face moments earlier disappeared entirely, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Grayson stammered, his usual bravado crumbling under the weight of Michael's presence. He tried to compose himself, straightening his posture and clearing his throat. "Look, sir, I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize what?" Michael interrupted sharply, taking another step closer. His boots clicked against the pavement with each deliberate movement, amplifying the tension. "You didn't realize that my father is a human being? You didn't realize that he's a veteran who served this country with honor while you were probably still in diapers? Or maybe you thought your badge gave you the right to humiliate anyone who doesn't fit your narrow-minded worldview?" Each word struck Grayson like a hammer, forcing him to take a step back. Never in his career had he encountered someone who could dismantle his sense of superiority so completely. Michael's tone left no room for excuses or half-hearted apologies. This wasn't just a son defending his father. It was a leader addressing an injustice, someone who understood power and how to wield it responsibly. Grayson fumbled for words, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the spray paint can. For John, watching the confrontation unfold felt surreal. He stood there, still, covered in red paint, his body stiff with shock. Part of him wanted to intervene, to tell Michael not to bother, that it wasn't worth it. But another part, the deeper, more primal part, felt a surge of pride. Here was his son, standing tall and unyielding, refusing to let this act of cruelty go unanswered. Tears welled up in John's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of gratitude. For Michael, for the neighbors peeking out of their windows, and even for himself, for raising a son capable of such strength. As the confrontation continued, something remarkable began to happen. Neighbors who had initially stayed hidden behind closed doors started emerging cautiously. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from across the street, stepped onto her porch, clutching her cane tightly. Young Tommy, who often helped John with gardening chores, appeared beside her, his fists clenched in anger. Even Mr. Patel, the soft-spoken grocery store owner, ventured outside, holding his phone as if ready to record the scene. Each person carried their own reasons for stepping forward, but collectively, they formed a silent wall of support around John and Michael. Michael noticed them too, though he never broke eye contact with Grayson. Their presence only strengthened his resolve. "This isn't just about my father," he said, his voice rising slightly so everyone within earshot could hear. "It's about every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their age, or where they come from. It's about holding people like you accountable for your actions." The crowd murmured in agreement, emboldened by Michael's words. Some nodded vigorously, others whispered encouragement, and a few even clapped softly. Grayson, meanwhile, looked increasingly cornered. His attempts to justify his behavior fell flat, drowned out by the growing chorus of disapproval. "I was just joking around," he muttered weakly, glancing nervously at the gathering crowd. "It was harmless fun." "Harmless?" Michael echoed incredulously, his voice dripping with disdain. "You call spraying paint on an elderly man's head harmless? If that's your idea of humor, then perhaps you're in the wrong line of work." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "My father fought for this country. He endured hardships most of us can't even imagine. And yet here he is, decades later, being attacked on his own property. Not by an enemy soldier, but by someone sworn to protect him." By now, the entire neighborhood had gathered. Phones were out, capturing the scene as it unfolded. Someone called the local news station, tipping them off about the dramatic confrontation. Within minutes, reporters arrived, eager to document the story. Camera crews set up tripods, microphones were thrust into the air, and questions flew from all directions. "Colonel Anderson, can you comment on what happened here today?" one reporter asked. Another shouted, "Officer Grayson, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Grayson tried to retreat, mumbling something about needing to file a report. But Michael wasn't about to let him escape so easily. "Oh no, officer," he said firmly, blocking Grayson's path. "You're not going anywhere until this is resolved. Not only will you apologize to my father publicly, but you'll also answer to your superiors for your conduct." The crowd erupted in cheers, emboldened by Michael's unwavering stance. Even those who had initially hesitated to speak up now joined in, voicing their outrage and demanding accountability. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media platforms lit up with posts condemning Grayson's actions and praising Michael and John for their courage. Hashtags like Justice for John and Come Our Stand Against Racism trended locally and eventually gained national attention. People shared images of John covered in paint, juxtaposed with photos of Michael in his uniform, creating a powerful narrative of resilience and justice. Local activists organized rallies outside the police department, calling for systemic reforms and greater transparency. Protest signs read, "No more abuse of power, and veterans deserve respect," echoing the sentiments of a community united in its demand for change. Back at the scene, the confrontation reached its climax, when Grayson finally relented. Under pressure from both Michael and the growing crowd, he offered a reluctant apology, though it lacked sincerity. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't mean any harm." John, still shaken but regaining some composure, simply nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak, fearing his emotions might overwhelm him. Instead, he turned to Michael, placing a hand on his son's shoulder in silent gratitude. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the cameras packed up, John and Michael sat together on the porch. The paint-streaked fence loomed behind them, a stark reminder of the day's events. Though exhausted, neither of them felt defeated. In fact, they felt strangely empowered. What had started as a cruel act of racism had transformed into a moment of solidarity and resistance. Together they had shown that standing up against injustice, even in the face of fear, could inspire others to do the same. As the stars twinkled above, John leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. "You know, son," he said softly, breaking the silence, "there's a lot of ugliness in this world. But today reminded me that there's beauty too, in people like you, in our neighbors, and in the hope that things can get better." Michael smiled, squeezing his father's hand reassuringly. "We'll keep fighting for that beauty, Dad," he replied. "No matter what. Though the scars of the day would linger, both physical and emotional, they served as a testament to the battle fought and won." For John and Michael, this was more than just a personal victory. It was a step toward a brighter, fairer future. And as the town drifted off to sleep, whispers of hope and determination lingered in the air, carried by the gentle breeze that swept through the quiet streets. The days following the incident were anything but quiet for John Anderson and his son Michael. What had started as a personal attack on an elderly veteran quickly escalated into a national conversation about racism, accountability, and respect for those who served their country. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. Images of Grayson's cruel act juxtaposed with Michael's defiant stance in full military regalia dominated headlines. Social media buzzed with outrage and admiration, amplifying voices that demanded justice not just for John, but for countless others who had suffered similar indignities. For John, the sudden attention was overwhelming. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, preferring the simple pleasures of gardening and painting his fence over public recognition. But now, reporters camped outside his house, eager to hear his perspective. Strangers sent letters and gifts, expressing solidarity and gratitude for his resilience. Local businesses offered free meals, discounts, and services to show their support. A group of volunteers even showed up one morning to repaint his fence, transforming it into a symbol of hope and unity. Each brushstroke carried a message. "We stand with you." Despite the outpouring of kindness, John struggled to shake off the weight of what had happened. The red paint may have been washed away from his skin, but the memory of Grayson's mocking laughter lingered. Night after night he lay awake replaying the scene in his mind, the humiliation, the shock, the fear. Yet amidst the pain, there was also pride. Pride in how he had handled himself, refusing to let Grayson provoke him further. And pride in Michael, whose unwavering defense reminded him why he had raised his son the way he did, to be strong, compassionate, and fearless. Michael, too, found himself thrust into the limelight. As a high-ranking colonel, he was no stranger to leadership or public speaking. But this was different. This wasn't about strategy briefings or military parades. It was deeply personal. Every interview he gave, every speech he delivered, came from the heart. He spoke passionately about the importance of respecting veterans regardless of race or background. He emphasized the need for law enforcement agencies to root out prejudice and hold officers accountable for misconduct. His words resonated far beyond the small Midwestern town, inspiring people across the nation to reflect on their own biases and take action against systemic injustice. Grayson, meanwhile, faced mounting consequences for his actions. The police department launched an internal investigation, suspending him without pay pending the outcome. Calls for his termination grew louder as more details of the incident emerged. Former colleagues came forward, recounting instances where Grayson had displayed similar behavior toward minority residents. Complaints that had once been dismissed were revisited, painting a damning picture of a man unfit to wear a badge. Public pressure forced the department to act swiftly, promising reforms to prevent future incidents. But Grayson's troubles didn't end there. Legal repercussions loomed large as civil rights organizations filed lawsuits on behalf of John, seeking damages for emotional distress and violation of civil liberties. Community leaders called for mandatory sensitivity training for all officers, along with stricter oversight mechanisms. Protesters gathered daily outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Accountability now," and "Protect and serve." Everyone. The protests drew widespread media coverage, shining a harsh light on systemic issues within law enforcement. As the weeks passed, the ripple effects of the incident became impossible to ignore. Schools incorporated the story into discussions about racism and civic responsibility. Churches held prayer vigils for healing and reconciliation. Even local politicians weighed in, using the controversy to push for policy changes aimed at fostering equality and fairness. For many, John's experience served as a wake-up call, a stark reminder that prejudice could rear its ugly head anywhere, anytime, unless actively challenged. Amidst the chaos, John and Michael found solace in each other's company. They spent evenings sitting on the porch, talking about everything from mundane household repairs to profound philosophical questions. These conversations helped them process the whirlwind of emotions they'd been experiencing. John often expressed his disbelief at how much impact one moment had made. "I never imagined something like this would happen to me," he admitted one evening, staring at the newly painted fence. "And yet here we are, making a difference." Michael nodded thoughtfully, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes change starts with the smallest things," he replied. "A single act of courage can inspire others to do the same. That's what you did, Dad. You stood your ground even when it felt unbearable, and because of that, people are waking up." Their bond deepened through shared adversity. Michael made it a point to visit more frequently, ensuring his father wasn't overwhelmed by the constant attention. Together, they attended community meetings, rallies, and fundraisers, organized in John's honor. At these events, Michael continued advocating for systemic reform, while John shared his story, urging others not to lose faith in humanity. Their partnership proved unstoppable. A retired soldier and his decorated officer son united in the fight for justice. One particularly memorable event took place at the town hall. Hundreds of residents packed into the auditorium, eager to hear Michael speak. When he stepped onto the stage, dressed in his uniform, the room erupted in applause. He began by thanking everyone for their support before launching into a powerful address. "Racism isn't just an individual problem, it's a societal one," he declared, his voice steady and commanding. "It hides in policies, in institutions, and attitudes we sometimes don't even realize we hold. But today I ask you to look inward, to challenge yourselves and your communities. Because real change doesn't start with laws or punishments. It starts with us." The audience listened intently, hanging on his every word. Some wiped away tears, moved by his sincerity. Others scribbled notes, determined to carry his message forward. When Michael finished, the standing ovation lasted several minutes, underscoring the profound impact his words had made. Afterward, dozens of attendees lined up to shake his hand and thank him personally. Among them was Mrs. Thompson, who handed him a handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding us what true leadership looks like," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Back home, John watched the news coverage of the event, a proud smile spreading across his face. Though he preferred staying behind the scenes, he couldn't deny the sense of fulfillment that came from seeing his son make such a difference. "You're going to change the world, Michael," he said later that night, patting his son on the shoulder. "Mark my words." Michael chuckled softly, brushing off the compliment. "We're changing it together, Dad," he corrected gently. "None of this would have happened without you." Their journey was far from over. Challenges lay ahead, legal battles, ongoing advocacy work, and the emotional toll of reliving the incident repeatedly. But neither John nor Michael doubted their ability to face them head-on. They had already proven that resilience and unity could overcome hatred and ignorance. And as long as they stood side by side, they knew they could weather whatever storms came their way. In the months that followed, John's little white cottage became more than just a home. It became a beacon of hope. People stopped by regularly, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of appreciation. The fence, once a target of cruelty, now bore messages of love and encouragement scrawled by well-wishers. "Thank you for your service," one note read. "Never forget your strength," another urged. These small gestures reminded John that he wasn't alone, that an entire community stood with him, ready to fight for a better tomorrow. And so life in the small Midwestern town slowly returned to normal. But it was a new kind of normal. One shaped by courage, compassion, and a collective commitment to doing better. For John and Michael, the road ahead remained uncertain, but they walked it together, hand in hand, driven by a shared belief in justice and dignity for all. The fallout from the incident continued to reverberate through the town and beyond, touching lives in ways no one could have anticipated. What began as a cruel act of racism had transformed into a movement, a rallying cry for justice, accountability, and respect. The momentum showed no signs of slowing down, fueled by John Anderson's quiet dignity and Michael's unwavering determination to turn tragedy into triumph. Together, they became symbols of resilience, inspiring others to stand up against prejudice and fight for meaningful change. For Officer Grayson, the consequences were swift and severe. Suspended without pay and under investigation, he found himself isolated not only professionally, but personally as well. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had brought shame upon the department. His once bragging attitude dissolved into paranoia as he realized the full extent of the backlash. Reporters hounded him at every turn, demanding answers he couldn't or wouldn't provide. When asked about his intentions that fateful afternoon, Grayson muttered vague apologies, claiming he didn't mean any harm. But these hollow words failed to sway public opinion. People saw them for what they were, attempts to deflect responsibility rather than genuine remorse. Legal proceedings added another layer of pressure. Civil rights organizations filed multiple lawsuits on behalf of John, seeking damages for emotional distress and violations of civil liberties. These cases garnered widespread attention, drawing experts who dissected Grayson's conduct and its implications for law enforcement nationwide. Legal analysts debated whether this could set a precedent for holding officers accountable when their actions crossed ethical lines. Meanwhile, Grayson's defense team scrambled to mitigate the damage, arguing that his behavior, while inappropriate, didn't warrant such severe penalties. Their efforts fell flat in the court of public opinion, where outrage over systemic racism within policing ran deep. The police department, eager to distance itself from the scandal, announced sweeping reforms aimed at addressing long-standing issues of bias and misconduct. Mandatory sensitivity training sessions were introduced for all officers, covering topics like implicit bias, cultural competency, and de-escalation techniques. Community oversight boards were established to ensure transparency and accountability, giving residents a voice in how law enforcement operated. While some praised these measures as steps in the right direction, critics argued they didn't go far enough. Activists called for more drastic changes, including independent investigations into police brutality allegations and stricter hiring protocols to weed out prejudiced candidates. As the town grappled with these developments, John and Michael found themselves at the center of it all. Requests poured in daily, from interview offers to invitations to speak at rallies and conferences. Initially reluctant to embrace their newfound roles as advocates, they eventually realized the power of their platform. Every word they spoke carried weight, resonating with audiences hungry for leadership and guidance. Michael, ever the strategist, used his military background to organize grassroots campaigns promoting racial equality and veterans' rights. He partnered with local organizations to host workshops, distribute educational materials, and encourage dialogue between marginalized communities and law enforcement agencies. John, though less comfortable in the spotlight, played an equally vital role. His presence alone told a story, one of survival, strength, and grace under fire. At events, he shared snippets of his life, weaving tales of sacrifice and service during the Vietnam War with reflections on the challenges faced by minorities even today. His humility struck a chord with listeners, many of whom admitted they'd never fully understood the struggles endured by veterans or people of color until hearing him speak. "We don't ask for special treatment," John often said, his voice steady yet filled with conviction. "All we want is to be treated with dignity and respect." Their advocacy extended beyond speeches and interviews. Inspired by the volunteers, who repainted his fence, John and Michael launched a community initiative called Neighbors Helping Neighbors. The program focused on fostering unity by encouraging residents to assist one another, regardless of race, age, or socioeconomic status. Projects ranged from home repairs for elderly neighbors to organizing food drives for struggling families. Within weeks, hundreds signed up to participate, eager to contribute to something positive after months of tension and division. One particularly impactful project involved creating a memorial garden dedicated to veterans. Located near the town square, the space featured plaques honoring fallen soldiers alongside benches where visitors could sit and reflect. Volunteers planted flowers chosen specifically for their symbolism: poppies for remembrance, sunflowers for hope, and lavender for peace. During the dedication ceremony, John stood beside Michael, visibly moved as townsfolk gathered to pay tribute. A young girl approached them afterward, clutching a handmade card decorated with stars and stripes. "Thank you for serving our country," she whispered shyly before running back to her parents. Tears welled up in John's eyes as he held the card close, overwhelmed by the gesture. Despite the progress being made, the journey wasn't without obstacles. Some individuals resisted change, clinging to outdated beliefs and resenting efforts to address inequality. Anonymous threats arrived in the mail, warning John and Michael to back off or face consequences. One night, someone spray-painted hateful messages on their driveway, a chilling echo of the original attack. Instead of letting fear consume them, however, father and son chose to respond with courage. They cleaned up the mess together, vowing not to let hatred deter them from their mission. Supporters rallied around them, organizing vigils and offering protection whenever necessary. Through it all, John and Michael leaned on each other for strength. Their bond grew stronger with each challenge they faced, forged in the fires of adversity. Evenings spent on the porch became sacred rituals, moments of reflection and connection amidst the chaos. They talked about everything, the highs and lows of their journey, memories from the past, dreams for the future. Sometimes laughter filled the air as Michael recounted funny anecdotes from his time in the military. Other times, silence reigned, allowing them to simply exist in each other's company. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, John turned to Michael with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he began, his tone soft but deliberate, "when I came home from Vietnam, I thought my work was done. I figured I'd served my purpose, and now it was time to live quietly, enjoy what little life I had left." He paused, gazing out at the freshly painted fence glowing faintly in the twilight. "But all of this has shown me otherwise. Maybe our purpose doesn't end when we hang up our uniforms. Maybe it evolves, grows bigger than ourselves." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing his father's words. "I think you're right, Dad," he replied. "And maybe that's why we're here, to show people that fighting for justice isn't just about battles overseas. It's about standing up for what's right, wherever you are, whatever form it takes." He placed a hand on John's shoulder, squeezing gently. "We're doing good work, you and I. Real work. Real work indeed. The kind that reshapes communities, challenges norms, and inspires generations." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, John and Michael continued pushing forward, driven by a shared vision of a better world. They knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but they also knew they weren't walking it alone. Behind them stood a network of supporters, neighbors, friends, strangers turned allies, all united in their quest for fairness and equality. In the end, what started as a single act of cruelty blossomed into something extraordinary. It sparked conversations, ignited movements, and reminded everyone involved of humanity's capacity for both darkness and light. For John Anderson, it reaffirmed his belief in the goodness of people, despite the hardships he'd endured. For Michael Anderson, it solidified his commitment to using his position and influence to effect real change. And for the town itself, it marked a turning point, a moment when ordinary citizens rose above fear and division to champion justice and compassion. Life may never return to the simplicity John cherished before that fateful afternoon. But perhaps simplicity wasn't the goal anymore. Perhaps the goal was growth, not just for him and Michael, but for everyone touched by their story. As they stood side by side, watching the stars emerge one by one in the velvet sky, they felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, the connections forged, and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, light could still shine through. Months had passed since the day Officer Grayson's cruel act of racism shocked the small Midwestern town, but its impact continued to ripple outward like waves on a still pond. The story of John Anderson and his son Michael had transcended local boundaries, becoming a beacon of hope and resilience for people across the nation. What began as an isolated incident of prejudice had evolved into a catalyst for change, a movement that challenged systemic injustices and inspired countless others to take action. For John, life had transformed in ways he never imagined. Once content with tending to his garden and painting his fence, he now found himself at the forefront of a growing effort to promote equality and respect. Invitations poured in from all corners, from schools eager to teach students about perseverance, to veteran organizations seeking to honor those who served, to advocacy groups determined to dismantle racial bias. Though initially hesitant to embrace this new role, John soon realized the power of sharing his story. Each time he spoke, he saw how deeply his words resonated with audiences hungry for authenticity and courage. At one high school assembly, John stood before a sea of teenagers, many of whom had only heard whispers of racism or discrimination in history books. Dressed in his old army jacket adorned with medals earned decades ago, he recounted his experiences during the Vietnam War, the sacrifices made, the hardships endured, and the pride he felt serving his country. But he didn't stop there. He also shared the pain of coming home to a society that often treated him as less than equal because of the color of his skin. "I fought for freedom," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But when I returned, I discovered that freedom wasn't guaranteed for everyone, not even for those who risked their lives to protect it." The room fell silent as students absorbed his words. Some wiped away tears, others scribbled notes furiously, determined not to forget what they'd just heard. Afterward, a young black student approached him, clutching a notebook. "Thank you for telling us your story," she said softly. "It makes me feel like I can make a difference too." John smiled warmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You absolutely can," he replied. "Every single one of you has the power to create change. Don't ever doubt that." Michael, meanwhile, channeled his energy into systemic reform, leveraging his position as a colonel to advocate for policy changes within law enforcement agencies. His military background gave him unique insight into leadership and accountability, which he used to push for stricter oversight mechanisms and better training programs for officers. He traveled extensively, speaking at conferences and meeting with lawmakers to discuss strategies for combating institutional racism. At every opportunity, he emphasized that true progress required more than surface-level fixes. It demanded a fundamental shift in mindset. One such event took place in Washington, D.C., where Michael addressed a packed auditorium filled with policymakers, activists, and concerned citizens. Clad in his full military uniform, he commanded attention the moment he stepped onto the stage. "Racism isn't just an individual problem. It's woven into the fabric of our institutions," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. It hides in policies that seem neutral on the surface but disproportionately harm marginalized communities. It thrives in cultures of silence, where bad behavior goes unchecked because no one dares to speak up. His speech struck a chord with listeners, sparking impassioned discussions long after he left the podium. Attendees praised his ability to blend personal anecdotes with hard-hitting facts, making complex issues accessible to everyone. One attendee, a seasoned civil rights attorney, approached him afterward, visibly moved. "Colonel Anderson," she said, extending her hand, "your words reminded me why I chose this path in the first place. We need more leaders like you, people willing to use their platform for good." Back home, the Andersons' efforts bore fruit in tangible ways. Their Neighbors, Helping Neighbors initiative gained traction, attracting volunteers from neighboring towns and cities. Projects expanded beyond home repairs and food drives to include mentorship programs pairing veterans with at-risk youth, job fairs connecting unemployed residents with local businesses, and workshops teaching conflict resolution skills. These initiatives fostered a sense of community rarely seen in modern society, bridging divides and fostering mutual understanding. Perhaps the most significant development was the establishment of a permanent memorial honoring veterans and victims of racial injustice. Located near the town square, the site featured a towering statue of a soldier standing alongside a civilian, symbolizing unity between those who serve and those who fight for equality. Engraved plaques listed names of fallen heroes, accompanied by quotes emphasizing peace, justice, and compassion. During the unveiling ceremony, John and Michael stood side by side, watching as hundreds gathered to pay tribute. As a choir sang a hauntingly beautiful rendition of Amazing Grace, John closed his eyes, feeling a profound sense of closure and renewal. Not everything went smoothly, however. Resistance lingered among certain factions unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths. Anonymous threats persisted, forcing John and Michael to remain vigilant. One particularly unsettling incident occurred late at night when someone hurled rocks through their windows, shattering glass and scattering shards across the living room floor. Rather than succumbing to fear, they responded with resolve. Community members rallied around them, forming neighborhood watch groups and offering financial support for repairs. Local authorities increased patrols in the area, signaling their commitment to protecting the family. These acts of solidarity reinforced the Andersons' belief in humanity's capacity for kindness and courage. They reminded themselves daily that while hatred existed, so did love. And love, they decided, was worth fighting for. Evenings spent on the porch became sacred rituals, moments of reflection and gratitude amidst the chaos. Sometimes laughter echoed through the air as they reminisced about funny memories. Other times silence reigned, allowing them to simply exist in each other's presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the freshly painted fence, Michael turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he began, his tone soft yet deliberate, "do you ever wonder if we're doing enough?" John paused, considering the question carefully before responding. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "But then I remember something important. Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, a journey, and every step we take brings us closer to where we want to be." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing his father's wisdom. "You're right," he said, "and maybe that's the key, to keep moving forward no matter how slow or difficult it feels, because giving up isn't an option." He placed a hand on John's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Together, we'll get there." Their determination paid off in unexpected ways. Inspired by the Andersons' story, individuals across the country began taking action in their own communities. Teachers incorporated lessons about racism and social justice into their curricula. Churches hosted interfaith dialogues aimed at promoting empathy and understanding. Grassroots movements sprang up, advocating for policy reforms and holding institutions accountable. Slowly but surely, a wave of positive change swept through the nation, fueled by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Even Officer Grayson's fate served as a reminder of accountability and redemption. Found guilty of misconduct and gross negligence, He faced severe penalties, including termination from the police force and mandatory participation in rehabilitation programs. While some argued his punishment wasn't harsh enough, others viewed it as an opportunity for growth, for both Grayson and society at large. If nothing else, his downfall underscored the importance of confronting prejudice head-on, lest it fester and destroy lives. As winter approached, blanketing the town in a layer of snow, John and Michael reflected on the past year. Challenges remained, but so did hope. Their little white cottage, once a symbol of vulnerability, now radiated strength and resilience. Flowers planted by volunteers peeked out from beneath the frost, promising new life come spring. Together, they sat on the porch, bundled in coats and scarves, sipping hot cocoa as they watched the world settle into quiet stillness. "Do you think we've done enough?" John asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "We'll never do enough," he replied. "But that's okay, because the work itself is what matters, not the finish line." He glanced at his father, smiling despite the cold. "Besides, we've got each other, and that's more than enough to keep going." In the end, their journey wasn't about achieving perfection or eradicating injustice entirely. It was about planting seeds of change, nurturing them with love and persistence, and trusting that others would carry the torch when they could no longer run. For John and Michael, the road ahead promised trials and triumphs alike, but they faced it together, united by a shared belief in justice, dignity, and the enduring power of hope. The final chapter of John and Michael Anderson's journey unfolded not with a dramatic bang, but with a quiet, steady resolve, a testament to their unwavering commitment to creating lasting change. As the seasons changed and snow gave way to spring, the small Midwestern town they called home bore witness to transformations both visible and intangible. What had once been a place marked by division and silence now thrived as a community united in purpose, thanks in large part to the courage and resilience of an elderly veteran and his determined son. For John, life regained a semblance of normalcy, though it was far richer than before. No longer content to simply tend to his garden or repaint his fence, he embraced his role as a storyteller and advocate. He visited schools regularly, sharing his experiences with students eager to learn about history beyond textbooks. His stories weren't just about war or racism. They were about hope, perseverance, and the power of standing up for what is right. Each time he spoke, he saw glimpses of himself in the young faces staring back at him, uncertainty mixed with determination, fear tempered by bravery. One day, during a visit to an elementary school, John met a boy named Marcus, who reminded him of his younger self. Shy and hesitant, Marcus lingered near the back of the classroom, avoiding eye contact until John knelt beside him after the presentation. "You don't have to be afraid," John said gently, handing him a small American flag pin. "Sometimes being brave means speaking up when no one else will, and sometimes it means listening when others need to be heard." Marcus clutched the pin tightly, nodding slowly, and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." In that moment, John felt a surge of pride, not just for Marcus, but for all the children who would grow up carrying these lessons into the future. Michael, too, continued his tireless work advocating for systemic reform. The recognition he received, from awards honoring his leadership to invitations to speak at prestigious forums, only fueled his drive to push harder. Yet, despite the accolades, he remained grounded, always reminding himself that the true measure of success lay not in applause, but in tangible outcomes. One of his proudest achievements came when several police departments adopted training modules developed under his guidance, emphasizing cultural competency and accountability. These programs became mandatory nationwide, marking a significant step toward dismantling institutional bias within law enforcement. But perhaps Michael's greatest triumph was closer to home. Inspired by his father's humility and strength, he spearheaded the creation of a scholarship fund for minority veterans seeking higher education. Named the John Anderson Legacy Scholarship, it provided financial assistance and mentorship opportunities to those transitioning from military service to civilian life. At the inaugural ceremony, Held on Veterans Day, John stood beside Michael, visibly moved as recipient after recipient expressed gratitude for the opportunity. "This isn't just my legacy," John told the audience, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to everyone who believes in second chances and brighter tomorrows." As the years passed, the scars of the past began to heal, though they never fully disappeared. The memorial garden dedicated to veterans and victims of racial injustice became a cherished gathering spot, drawing visitors from near and far. Families brought picnics, couples exchanged vows beneath its archways, and activists organized peaceful protests there, ensuring the space remained alive with purpose. Every year on the anniversary of the incident, residents gathered to reflect on how far they'd come and how much further they still needed to go. It was a reminder that progress wasn't linear. It required constant vigilance and effort. Even Officer Grayson's story found closure, albeit bittersweet. After completing his rehabilitation program, he resurfaced briefly in local news headlines, not as a villain, but as someone grappling with redemption. Though many doubted his sincerity, some believed that genuine remorse could lead to transformation. Whether or not Grayson truly changed remained uncertain, but his downfall served as a cautionary tale, reinforcing the importance of accountability and compassion in equal measure. Through it all, John and Michael leaned on each other, finding solace in shared memories and dreams for the future. Their bond, forged in adversity, only grew stronger with time. Evenings spent on the porch became less about discussing challenges and more about celebrating victories, however small. They laughed often, marveling at how one cruel act had sparked such profound change. Life has a funny way of turning things around, John mused one evening, sipping tea as fireflies danced in the twilight. Sometimes you think you're fighting alone, but then you realize you've got an entire army behind you. Michael smiled, leaning back in his chair. And sometimes, he added, that army includes people you didn't even know were watching. He gestured toward the street where neighbors waved as they strolled past. Some stopped to chat, thanking them again for their courage and leadership. Others left baskets of fresh produce or baked goods on their doorstep, tokens of appreciation that never ceased to humble them. Their efforts also inspired others to take action in unexpected ways. A group of teenagers formed a youth council focused on addressing racial inequality in schools. Local businesses implemented diversity initiatives, hiring practices, and outreach programs aimed at supporting marginalized communities. Even the police department underwent a cultural shift, with officers actively engaging in community-building activities like hosting block parties and participating in charity events. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, a fragile yet hopeful foundation upon which to build a better tomorrow. As summer approached, bringing with it warm breezes and blooming flowers, John and Michael decided to celebrate their journey in a special way. They organized a town-wide festival called Unity Day, inviting everyone to come together for music, food, and fellowship. Volunteers transformed the park into a vibrant tapestry of colors, stringing lights between trees and setting. A booth showcasing local art and crafts. Children ran barefoot through sprinklers while elders swapped stories under shady canopies. For one glorious afternoon, differences melted away, replaced by laughter and connection. At the heart of the celebration stood a mural painted by residents, a collaborative masterpiece depicting scenes from the town's recent history. There was John, standing tall beside his freshly painted fence. Michael, resplendent in his uniform, confronting Grayson, and countless others whose contributions, big and small, had shaped the narrative. Beneath the mural, written in bold letters, were the words, "Together we rise." As John and Michael unveiled it to thunderous applause, tears streamed down their faces, not of sadness, but of joy and fulfillment. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky in bursts of red, white, and blue, John turned to Michael with a smile. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my best days were behind me, but now I feel like we're just getting started." Michael nodded, wrapping an arm around his father's shoulders. "We are, Dad, and whatever comes next, We'll face it together. In the end, their story wasn't just about overcoming hatred or injustice. It was about building bridges, fostering understanding, and proving that even in the darkest moments light could shine through. For John and Michael, the road ahead promised challenges and triumphs alike, but they faced it with open hearts and steadfast determination. Together, they had shown that resilience wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about using pain as fuel for change, turning wounds into wisdom and transforming tragedy into triumph. And so, as the stars twinkled above and the echoes of laughter faded into the night, the Andersons stood side by side, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Their legacy wasn't etched in stone or captured in photographs. It lived in the hearts of those they touched, carried forward by a community united in hope and purpose. In a world often divided by fear and prejudice, they proved that love, courage, and unity could prevail, and that perhaps was the greatest victory of all.